welcome everyone. Maybe we'll just go ahead and dive in since it is a little afternoon. Welcome to Small Practices Network. I'm Christina, for those who haven't met me before. I'm one of the co-chairs and Kristen is the other co-chair. And we are super excited today to have Emily Mottram with us. She is a principal of Mottram Architecture in Maine, which specializes in sustainable residential design. And so that, she brings to our group lots of things that have come up in many conversations in small practices about, first of all, this idea of specializing in a very specific strain of residential design. But then also she does a lot of other things, as you probably read in the bio that we posted on the website. She hosts a podcast, E3 Energy and Efficiency with Emily, which focuses on building science, architecture, and female entrepreneurship. She's a co-host of the BS, and BS stands for Building Science, and Beer Show, which is a monthly live stream building science show. She is a co-author to a book that's about to come out, The Pretty Good House, A Guide to Creating Better Homes. She teaches, and she has also design collaboration. Oh, now I've lost my spot. Sorry. And so there's also this collaboration between various small firms. And so we thought that it would be wonderful to have her join us, because it's not just about, it's about thinking about what all the things that small firms are able to do in different ways of plugging into the community. And, so many of the topics that we have talked about before. So I'm super excited to have Emily join us. We're going to run it today. Emily's going to give us an overview of some of the work she's done. We'll have a few moderated questions and conversation at the beginning. And then, as always, we welcome your questions, pipe in anytime. And then at the end, I think we'll just take the conversation wherever it goes. So we'll totally open up the floor. So Emily, I'll pass it to you.
All right, I am going to share my screen, and I promise not too long, boring PowerPoint presentation, but let me see here. All right, so hopefully that's just showing you the screen, not all the other slides too, right?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, I just wanted to give you guys kind of a brief overview of who I am and what I'm currently doing and some of the things that I did in the past. And you actually mentioned a couple of things, which I don't think I put in here, which was the collaborative that I have with my office partner, who's a landscape architect and a builder, a female builder in the Cumberland area. So I'll try to remember to touch on that. And you said something about community building. And I think that's the other thing that I didn't put on here, which is that I do plans for a community action agency as well. So they have high performance plans for a building project that they do where the homeowners build their own homes. And so I don't think I talked about that, but if anybody has interest in learning more about that, just make that one of the questions that pops up and I'll talk more about it. This is where you can mostly find me via email. On Instagram is the social media platform that I am most active on. My podcast is monthly now. It was weekly for a while. So this is actually season 4 of the podcast. So there's plenty of back issues if you guys want to follow up on that. And then the BS and Beer Show is the first Thursday of every month live. And I really encourage people to join the live conversations because just like here in this Zoom group, the chat box is quite active and really entertaining. And it's a great way to get to know some of the other people in the community. So these are 2 of the 5 houses in the 5-lot solar subdivision that I did. This is part of the collaborative. I'm actually partially in the yard here of my landscape architect, and the white farmhouse in the back is the first house that we built in this neighborhood, where we tested and trialed whether or not it would work and whether we could do it. So this was really a fun experiment. There is a neighborhood about a half a mile up the street, and people wander into our neighborhood all the time and say, this is exactly what I wanted, and it doesn't exist anywhere else. And so it's kind of fun to see how that is. And it really took me down this line of the difference between developers who sell land and build houses on them as a byproduct, and people like us who are really interested in the housing and what people actually want, building these small communities instead. So where I'm at now is actually a further step into the sustainability movement, which is building for chemically sensitive clients, because we're actually finding that more and more people, especially in the last couple of years, struggle with the building materials that are in their homes as we're building tighter homes, and that a lot of people have no idea. And there is actually no governing body in the United States that governs what we actually put in our building materials. And so starting to pay attention to this, we had a particular client who had multiple chemical sensitivities, and it was actually a really fun project because she didn't have an unlimited amount of money like the Living Building Challenge, where you might be substituting every product. We actually had to work with a limited budget to see how much we could actually eliminate from the building on a budget. And it's actually not as hard as you think. There are some things that just, I mean, wiring's going to come coated. There's not much that you can do about that without it being really expensive. But for us here in the Northeast, we could swap out plywoods with, actual board sheathing. We use a lot of cellulose insulation instead of foams. We try to be as foam free as possible. And the other thing that we do on top of that is try to build with carbon negative materials or low carbon materials, which actually falls right in line with a lot of things that are good for chemically sensitive homeowners. So this is sort of the next level of sustainable building that we've been doing on top of, what's the operational carbon of our building? How do we reduce energy? What do we do? And it's fun because we use a lot of natural materials. So these are natural shingles here in Maine. And the client actually bought a soy-based release agent for the concrete so that they didn't use petroleum-based forming for their forms on the concrete, which seems like such a simple thing, but we don't realize that we just use it in everyday material. And so they actually talked to all of the subcontractors on the job site and just said, hey, this is the reason why we're doing this. So before you go ahead and just do something that's just standard practice in the industry, let's just take one extra step to see, can we remove that or change that for something that could be an issue for the client? This is the plan for that. It's just a really simple, it's basically a tiny house with double stud walls and cellulose insulation. And they were coming from a tiny apartment in Boston. So building them a tiny house was more than fine. It's a 3-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that's like 1,100 square feet. So we just crammed as much as we could into this tiny living area. I think the next slide is a picture of the house. No, this is the porch. So she has an exterior screen porch. So because she has multiple chemical sensitivities, she actually sleeps on the screen porch a lot in the summertime. And one of the things that they did was count the number of cars that went past the house before they bought this piece of property. And so it was like one every half an hour. And she thought that was probably okay. So, I mean, just the random things, but the critical lessons that we learned, which was what's in our materials, is vital that they then know how to operate the house afterwards. Because if you don't know how to live in your high performance home, you can create moisture and mold issues. And so it was really important that we did commissioning with her so she knew how to operate her house, and that having the right team. This builder had never built like this before, but his standards of practice were to use board sheathings and not to use plywood. So we actually lucked out because some of the things that made the most sense were things that he did as a standard practice. And so we were able to just introduce a couple of new things to him, and it made it a great environment. And he was more than willing to learn. And it was a really satisfactory project for all of us on the team. So having the right team really makes a huge difference. And on top of that, I no longer do bid work because it's impossible to get the right team if you put your project out to bid. This is the book. There's a QR code. So if you're watching and you click the QR code, it'll take you to the book. This is not a concept that I pioneered. It's just something that I'm really passionate about. So we have a local building science group here in Maine that's been meeting for, oh my gosh, 12, 13 years at our performance building supplier. We get together, we debate ideas, we come across it. And a lot of people, when this first came about, were struggling with having to participate in some of the certification programs that we have, between Passive House or Lead Homes. And he said, I just want to build a pretty good house. And so we just started collaborating and pulling together all the things from the different certification programs that helped as a guideline for people, where you didn't have to do the program, but you could make incremental improvements until it financially didn't make sense. And that's the point behind this book. Is at the end of every chapter, it says, have you thought about all of these things? And it's just kind of a reminder of things that we should be thinking about as we're going through designing a house to make those improvements, focused on the science, the mold and moisture issues, what's in our building materials, carbon, and all of that. This is the podcast. You can get to it through my website. You can also listen to it on Apple, iTunes. You can listen to it on Spotify and Stitcher. So there's multiple different ways you can get to the podcast. But the point of the podcast, for a long time, I did blog posts until I realized people don't read anymore. And I love to talk and I love to interact with people. And so I started doing the podcast so that I could talk about these ideas. I get asked a lot of the same questions over and over, whether it's from other professionals or from clients. And so I just started doing the podcast to both highlight building science and things that people should be thinking about. Like, these are important. If you're building a house, think about these things. But also to highlight female entrepreneurship in this field, both as architects or female builders or female plumbers or female contractors, or really any kind of diversity. Like, I say female because I'm a woman, so that's kind of natural to me to kind of promote other people who are similar to me, but really any kind of diversity. Because what I've heard from people in schools is that the one thing that they miss was they didn't see somebody like them doing this, or they didn't know that they could do it. And so I try to, with the podcast, highlight other people out there who are doing really cool things and how diverse the trades can be. So that's the point of the podcast, I guess. Teaching and training. So I teach a sustainable design class at a local community college. I've been teaching that on and off since 2013. Just these new kids coming out of school, just having a leg up on things that we should be doing as codes are changing and, as you're getting better. So I teach a sustainable design class, writing a course that is based on the book that you guys just saw. So Taunton is going to be doing a course this summer, I think. So it'll be out hopefully at the end of the summer, I think. And it should have credits for architects. So if there are people on here who need to do continuing education and want something that's more specific to residential and pretty good house and how to get there, we're going to be putting together a course on that. I also do speaking engagements. I was at the International Builder Show in Florida, going to Midwest Building Science Symposium. So just, kind of other places, just bringing awareness to building science. The BS and Beer Show. This was started actually during the pandemic. So I mentioned our local meetup group, which is really important. And hopefully everybody has a local group. But when the pandemic hit and our local group couldn't meet in person anymore, we just hopped on Zoom to make sure that everybody was okay, to share resources if we needed to use it as an educational experience for anybody who's part of our group who felt like they wanted to learn more building science stuff. Word got out to people who have met us in other places that we were meeting on Zoom. And then the BS and Beer Show went from being a check-in to make sure our local group was okay to a weekly, until this year, building science show where we got on every Thursday night for the last 2 years to have all kinds of different guests and talk about all kinds of different building science show topics, and has really spurned a lot of other groups locally to meet all over the country. And in fact, we have a bunch of Canadians that join us too. So, so the BS and Beer Show has become even bigger than we had anticipated it. But it's basically just a volunteer organization, share building science with other people that are out there. So, and it's fun and it's rewarding thing that we do. We only do it monthly now because now that the pandemic has shifted and changed a little bit and more people are going out into the public or working more. I don't know how everybody else has been kind of on your end, but we've been busier than we've ever been before. It's hard for people to show up every week to a show. And so once a month to a local group that talks about building science is great, especially if you are in a more remote or rural area that doesn't have your own building science group. So it's a great way to continue to, get great information without being too, this is a webinar and we're talking about these things and you must learn all of these things. It's really conversational. It's usually fun. There's a lot of witty banter. We say BS stands for building science, but there's also a lot of BS that happens. It's a good time. And then last, one of the things I wanted to highlight is that before all the current things that I'm doing, I've done lots of other things as well. So when I started my business in 2009, the market was really horrible. I don't know if a lot of you remember that, but the market was terrible in 2009. And I thought to myself, I can either get out of doing this. I'm a registered architect now. I've made it, right? You like graduate from school, you get registered, and then you can do something else with your life. Or I could focus on what I thought was important for Maine and the Northeast and what I was really interested in. And so I was really interested in creating a more sustainable future for my practice. And so I started doing a lot of energy consulting, everything from just starting out, taking the state energy auditors class, doing a lot of consulting, going through doing energy audits for people, to HERS certification, passive house, LEED, Energy Star. Got to take them all. Everybody has something different to teach you. I did lighting consulting because there's nothing worse than designing a beautiful house and having a single light in the center of the room. And so I wanted to know a lot more about lighting because I personally feel that our homes have a social, mental, and emotional relationship with us, and lighting plays a big part in that, both natural lighting that we create with our windows, but also artificial lighting later in the day. Is it lower? It's not this overhead super bright light. And so I felt like lighting was important. So I did lighting consulting for a while so I could learn more about lighting consulting. And then somehow in the mix of all the energy consulting I did, I got roped into doing large scale energy engineering projects with multifamily housing. And so being able to see how much of an impact some of that has on the environment, even bigger than we're not going to solve the climate crisis with single family residential. But we're still going to build single family residential. So if we're going to do it, I want to, do the best that we can. But that there's a much bigger environmental impact when you're doing large scale stuff like that. Unfortunately for me, it was way too much time doing Excel spreadsheets and not enough time doing something that was creative. So I didn't love doing that. But I really saw the impact. And it was part of what also helped me to keep doing local community projects because I felt like it was really important. So those are the things that I did. So I'm just going to stop sharing there. So that's kind of a really broad overview of a lot of the things I've done since 2009. But if people have specific questions or want me to highlight or talk about any of those in general, I'm happy to do that. So enough of me rambling on.
We have some questions prepared, but I'm also very happy to just go ahead and open it up for a larger group discussion right from the get-go. So if anyone has something, you can either, just turn your mic, we're pretty informal here and we're a small enough group. Just turn on your microphone, video, or put it in the chat. Either way works. Emily, I would love to hear a little more about the small development you did and how that came to be. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah. So I think some of these small developments or micro developments happen when you have a couple of people who are really passionate about something. And so I ended up connecting with a woman who owned a restaurant for 20 years, sold the restaurant, kind of got out of that. And it was a restaurant in a ski area. So in the off season, they would build like one house a year. So she had some slight interest in building. And the first house that they built was a spec house, and she lived in it for the first year and she froze and she thought there has to be a better way. So then the second summer they built another house, and they built a super high performance house. And she was like, you could light a candle and live in it, but it was filled with foam. And she's like, there has to be a better way. And so when she moved to the area, she connected with a real estate agent who said, hey, I have this great, I think it's like 35-acre piece of property that you have to check out. It was really poorly harvested for timber, and they just left all the slash or whatever. And she is just really connected with nature, and she felt like she really needed to give back, and she knew there had to be a better way. And I was part of a networking group, and the computer guy had actually done all of their setup for her restaurant. And she mentioned to him that she was doing this. And he said, I have the architect that you have to talk to. And so the two of us went out, we stood on this piece of land, and she's like, can you see my vision? Can you see what I'm thinking about? And I was like, yeah, I get it. Like, I get it. Let's try it out. And I had just gotten to the point in my business where I had decided that I was going to stop taking on projects that didn't fulfill the mission that I thought that I wanted to do. And when I did that, I met this woman. And that was when I thought, okay, this is the time when I left space in my life, and what I wanted kind of came towards that. And we created this 5-lot subdivision, and it was supposed to be one house every year. We had the typical traditional development problem, which is one of the neighbors didn't want the not in my backyard, and decided to try to sue her on a technicality, which didn't have anything to do with her, but she had to prove it. So we actually did one house almost every year, except for 1 year. We had to wait. So all 5 houses are planned out and are all built now. And the importance in the beginning was just to set up a relationship with this piece of property. Everybody had to have solar. We built all high performance houses. I think we tried every different way you can do a basement here or insulate a basement, because we had to try them all. What worked better, what was more cost effective, what was easier to build. And it was really great because she was just open to every idea. And she lived in the first house. We built the first house on the piece of property. We didn't subdivide or anything. And we said, we're going to trial it, and she's going to live in it, and we're going to follow the numbers, and we're going to see how well we did. And it was fantastic. And that's by far the most popular plan set that I had. So as part of what I created with her, we made all of these houses plan sets so they would be available for other people to build. They can come and they can tour the houses, which was great because a lot of people don't understand what they're getting when they're designing a house. I don't know if you guys have seen this. We've started doing a lot more 3D, which really helps, but is still not quite the same as physically walking through a space. So then being able to walk through the space, see it. So I think we've built that white farmhouse 5 or 6 times since 2015. So it's popular. People like it. They can see it. They can understand the space. And we took all the pretty good house metrics and guidelines that I had been doing, with our local group and everything, and kind of tried to put as much into the houses as we could, build it smaller, have the windows and the lighting all in the right places. How do we cut back? Can we get a net zero house with builder grade windows? Which the answer is yes. If you have enough roof, you can do kind of whatever you want. It's not always the right answer. And we've moved to a lot more European windows and other things, which I'm happy to talk about. But we wanted to try to see, like, what could we do? What couldn't we do? What worked? And so we built those 5 houses in that community. We got our landscape architect involved. She actually lives as built the 4th house in the community, which is where our office is. That's my background for people who want to know about the background. She's really into biophilic design. And so getting rid of the just acres of grass. We've got a lot of pollinator plants in our gardens, and had her involved in helping us kind of pull this neighborhood together. Because of the zoning, we could only build 5 houses on this piece of property. We have walking trails in the back, which actually connect to a larger trail system past there. So you can go for miles from the back of the property, which was really important to a lot of the homeowners who live here. Was all but one have dogs. They go and they run on the hiking trails in the back. It connects to the bigger community beyond, and that was sort of a guiding principle for who moved into this development. So it not only brought together the environmental aspect, but it brought together, as the builder would say, like the front porch sitting. So a lot of these houses are oriented where there's a front porch. They'll sit on the porch, somebody will stop and talk to you for a half an hour. They get together and they have barbecues on the terrace in our landscape architect's yard. This is a great spot. And then we get together, we have barbecues. They have a yurt on the property. So they'll get together at the yurt. People can use it if somebody wants to come up and camp. And so it had a much bigger community feel, which is what we were trying to put together with this neighborhood. Aside from sustainability, is we didn't want the neighborhood where everybody drives straight into their garage, goes into their house, and then does not like participate with any of their neighbors. So we're really trying to pull together groups of people who are like-minded, who wanted to connect and to communicate, and that the houses had relationships like that. They're spread so that you're not just like looking into the neighbor's yard. I don't just like stand in my kitchen window and look at your house. They're all oriented to the south for solar and all of that. But at the same time, they all have some kind of front feature that, gives people the opportunity to go out, to sit on the front porch, to connect with each other, and to be present in their lives. And so that has worked out really well in this neighborhood.
That's awesome. So are there plans to do more small subdivisions like that? Like, does she want to keep going, or?
So everybody has asked us that, and
I'm not original.
we would love to, and that is the plan. We have a semi-solidified plan to do a couple more in another neighborhood farther away. The hardest part was she self-financed this project, which is hard to do as the developer builder. So there's a lot of infrastructure costs in a development that you have to put in between like the roadways and paying the engineers for subdivision plans. And, up here in this area, if we've got wetlands and streams and, there's a lot of impact, in the beginning to a developer, right? So you have to have funding to do that and to make it happen. There's this great group called Co-Everything, I think, where I think they're trying to pull together people who, like, we get those 5 people all from the beginning, right? And they would sort of fund the development, or like up here, it's actually 14 or less before it starts getting into a whole different level of subdivision. And so if you got those group of people together where you could pull some of that money to do the development, ahead of time, trying to use the people who care about it, right? Because the people who live here are the people who really, really care about it. But we have a tendency not to be the people who have all of the money, like the big developer money. And so they're trying this idea of getting people to band together to basically create a co-op that would allow developments like this to happen maybe a little bit easier, because otherwise it's either the architecture firm or the building firm who is funding it, or a developer. And, developers are in it for land sales and land management. They're not necessarily in it for the product that they put on the land. So you have to have a really keen developer who wants to kind of move outside of that box to jump into it. Now, as the codes start getting more strict, I think neighborhoods like this could happen with developers more easily. But as a rule of thumb across the board thus far, micro developments like this that really care about the environmental things happen to be funded by someone like us. And it's hard to do one after another because they do take a lot of funding in the beginning, and you have to have a certain number of lots sold before generally you have enough financing to put the road in or to put the other infrastructure in. So yes, in theory, we are planning to do more. We've gotten a lot on this. When we first started out, she really wanted to do like 800 square foot houses, like really small. And so we may take that into account because we find that that is something that doesn't seem to exist a lot, but there seem to be a lot of people who want that more. We're moving, I think, away from the 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath need. I'm finding more people who are looking for something smaller, but nothing is totally set in motion yet. Make it happen.
It's an interesting point about the codes and how that might really start changing.
Yeah, as the 2021 code and stretch code, depending on where you are, like I know you guys have a slightly stricter code, I think, than even we do. They're pretty good. Maine is on 2015. We've been building high performance houses for a while. We actually put a project through in 2015, like through the 2015 code, and then Portland decided they wanted to adopt the 2021 code, even though it wasn't required all over the state. And I was pleasantly happy that, you know, the project that we put through was still above the 2021 code. But then I looked at the 2021 code and I thought, this is actually great. Like, I would love to see people kind of just meeting the, you know, IECC 2021. And so I think as they get stricter, what our goal will be is to help people understand how to meet those things as opposed to, and while people ask me a lot, how do you convince your clients to do it? And the answer is I don't. Like, they already are on board with that. Between the podcast and BS and beer and all the things that I talk about, I think I make it pretty clear where I stand on it. But you never know. But if you talk to people in terms of what they want, healthy indoor air quality, they don't want to spend a fortune, you know, to heat their homes. They want to go to Florida for 3 months in the wintertime and not have frozen pipes. Like, you start talking to people about comfort, durability, risk management. You're not really selling them on anything. You're just saying, these are our standards of practice and this is what you're asking me to provide. And so this is what you know, this is what I think you should do. So.
I have a question, if you don't mind, I jump in. Hi, Emily. I am just sitting here in awe of how much you're able to get done. So I was curious, are you a sole practitioner? Do you have employees? If you are a sole practitioner, how do you structure your project teams to get it all done?
Yeah. So I am a sole practitioner. I recently had my husband join my LLC. So he has just recently started working with me, but prior to that, and that's new as of the spring of this year. So prior to that, what I did was I actually had a lot of consultants that worked with me. So in the small architecture world, this is a great opportunity for you to band together, especially if there's an architect that does what you want to do and needs help and you want to learn. This is a great way to get paid to learn how to do some of the things that they do. And so essentially I partnered with different either architects or design drafters, depending on what I needed to facilitate that. And so it's a good opportunity for people. And I will tell you, you may have to work with a couple of different people till you find somebody that's the right fit for what you want. I did lots of different things. You know, I worked with consultants who all used different software. I would not recommend that to you. I would recommend to pick a software that you want to use for your business and find consultants who know how to use that software, whether it's AutoCAD, Revit, PowerCAD, soft plan. I don't know. There's so many chief architect. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as you just say, this is what our office does, because the hardest part with working with a consultant outside of your office is they are not your employees. So you can't tell them when to work or what to do. And so if they happen to be on vacation that week and you're not using the same software, you may not have access to your project when you need a simple question like, how big is this vanity? well, I don't know because I can't open it because it's in this other program. And like, I'm going to have to wait a week for this person to come back. And so you can, you can request that they submit things in whatever format or version you want. You can set up a sharing, everything from Google Drive and Dropbox, which are, cost effective, where you say, when you submit something to me, send me both your drawing files and a PDF of this drawing file, so that you have access to it. But when you're working with multiple different consultants who are using multiple different softwares, it becomes a lot to manage, right? And so you then have to be the person that wants to manage people, is how we got it done. But it is a great way to share the load with other similar architects who either want to learn or have a skill that you don't have that you want to bring on board. So if you're trying to transition your firm into something that does more sustainable design, you can work with an independent architect who wants to do that work or does energy consulting work as part of it, because you can bring them onto your team. So if you're trying to sell an idea to a client who came to you who wants to do something that you don't have a lot of experience with, and maybe you don't have time to take a certification or whatever, it's a great way to partner with other people. And so the best thing that I can say is grow your network, because there's probably always going to be something that you don't know. And so being able to ask somebody who does know it, I mean, I don't want to say smarter than you, but knows different things. Like one of my really good friends who we have a little mastermind. It's a Facebook group where we just chat all day long. And like, sometimes we'll do like design charrettes, and sometimes one of the other designers who's on it knows the code inside and out. And like, I think it's just the most boring thing to like spend that much time reading the code books, but it's kind of his thing. And so I have a code question. I just go on and I'm like, hey, what does the code say about this? Or what's the code reference for that? Unlike, he can just send back the code reference in 3 minutes. And so instead of me spending an hour trying to read it or find out, I know I have a person who's going to know the answer to that. And so build your network of people so that you can, as a sole practitioner, it's really hard, right? So when I was on my own and I wasn't working with a lot of other consultants, is back in design school where you had other people to ask and like go through your design and talk about it. You don't have any of those people when you're on your own. So find some of those people. You're like, do you have like an hour to pop on Zoom and do a design charrette with me? Or can you review this plan set before I send it out for technical stuff? Because just like writing, I feel like we draw a lot of stuff and we think we see what we thought we drew, but we don't always see what we actually drew. And so it's great. I mean, there's so much information on a plan set too, that it's great to just have another person put a set of eyes on it who says, on page A1.1, you said XYZ in your note, but on your detail on sheet A4.5, you said something else. What are you doing here? Because this will be confusing for a builder. So it's nice to have somebody who, will take an hour out of their day and just review a plan set for you before you send it out to someone. So as a sole practitioner, I do that. The other thing that I do is I try to only check my email 3 times a day, in the beginning of the day, at lunch, and at the end of the day, because if you spend all day on email and you're a sole practitioner who actually has to do the work as well, you'll literally never get anything done. You could just spend all day in your email. So did that answer your question about how I get it done?
Yes, absolutely. I think the key takeaway for me is just developing that network of architects and other practitioners like you who can join your team, or you can join their team even, to get projects done together.
Yeah. So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. When I started my practice, I wanted this whole idea of like location independence, and could you go anywhere? And is it important for us to all be in the same office? And I would say if you have somebody who's young, who's joining your team, it is important for them to be somewhere close to you and for you to have a lot more check-ins with them. And when you start to have people who have a little bit more experience, I found that it doesn't it doesn't really matter if they're in the office with you or not. They could be anywhere in the world. I had a drafter who worked with me for a number of years who lived in New Orleans. Like, she wasn't in Maine. She didn't come to any of my projects. And it wasn't necessary because, I mean, her Revit skills were, I mean, she knew it inside and out. She just needed me to tell her what she was supposed to be drawing. And so finding those people doesn't really matter where they are. So
Mm-hmm. Is there a sort of a resource or resources that you recommend to find people who are?
No, and that's the one thing that I
No.
think is missing, and somebody should really develop that. Entrepreneur Architecture, if you guys aren't part of it, is a Facebook group and a website. He has tried to pull together small firm practitioners. I think there's 6,500 people who are part of that group, everything from, well-established architects through, new people who are in school. That's maybe one place to start to look for, somebody who could help you out there. I've found that the most successful people that I've worked with are people who have taken my class, or who I met working through another office, or who I met at, some kind of building science or other related group. So for me, those have been the most successful kind of introductions versus just somebody who just graduated from school who says, like, hey, I want to get experience or whatever. But I wish there was a database, but instead there's just, architecture firms posting that they need help with stuff. And so it's mostly just about connecting with people. And so when somebody sends me an email and they want to talk for a half an hour, I usually try to do that, because you never know when that person is going to be the person you need.
Right. Thank you. I also,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kristen. No,
I was just going to encourage people to jump in.
Perfect. Done.
No, perfect.
Emily, I have a question about, so kind of going a little bit into the nitty gritty of the building process. So, you talked about not doing bid work, and you have your kind of select contractors that you prefer to work with. I know we've spoken before about kind of an integrated design process where they're on board early. I'm curious how you, with your clients, how you structure the agreement of your participation throughout construction. So, when you're putting a proposal together, because from my perspective, or from what I see, I imagine you're pretty heavily involved in the build, unless it's a builder that you work with a lot and is really confident that can execute the details. But how do you kind of structure the agreement again with the client to say, throughout CA, this is my commitment? And is it a set thing, or you just do an hourly and it's going to be this much fee, and that piece of it?
It depends. So some of it depends, because we're in Maine. We have a lot of clients who are not here. So we'll set up a construction administration agreement with them, because they don't always understand the things that the client is, or that the contractor is asking for them. And so we have a construction administration agreement where we're basically the owner's advocate, where we explain things to them. We take it, the worst thing that you can do is have the builder try to figure it out on site, and they're trying to design and do all that stuff. And it's like, we make it clear to the client that, like, you're either paying me to do it or you're paying them to do it. And so, so when we have out-of-state clients, we often have a construction administration agreement, and it can be anything depending on what they need. If they need us to show up to the job site every week and send them pictures and get updates and sign off on applications for payment and all that stuff, right? That's a significant amount of work. If they just need us to show up periodically, which we build into our contract 5 site visits anyway, because we're doing a lot of environmental stuff, we want to see the project at certain phases. I'm unique in the fact that I have a blower door as an architect. I think you all need one. Go buy a blower door, best thing in the world. And like a small infrared camera. There's some great ones that are, fairly inexpensive. And buy a blower door secondhand too, if someone's getting rid of them. I mean, get it calibrated, and as long as it still runs, it's good. But so, like, we want to see the insulation that they put down before they pour the concrete slab, if we're doing a concrete slab, or we want to see their air sealing details. So if we've done a good job on how we're putting our building together, we should be able to do a shell test. And so if we can do a shell test and we've got our air barrier good on that, that's great. That helps them meet their air sealing targets. And especially if you're not doing anything other than trying to meet one of the more stringent new codes of, an ACH of 3. A shell test is great because it's before insulation and it allows them to solve a lot of issues that are really hard to do after you've done all your insulation. So we want to see the insulation before the sheetrock gets covered. Then we want to do a final blower door test when they're, still doing finished trim work or whatever, where they can seal windows before they've put in, sills and final trim. And then we come back and we do a final inspection, which is when we want the owner to also be there. And that's a commissioning inspection where we're going to test out the ERV because we put ventilation in all of our projects. So we're going to test out the ventilation system to make sure that they're actually getting what we asked for. We're going to make sure they understand how to use their high performance heating systems. So if you have people who haven't lived with an air source heat pump, they have no idea what it does. And I can't tell you, they all think that the thermostat is in the remote, and it's not. It's on the unit unless you actually have a wall thermostat. And so it's really entertaining to kind of watch them walk around and try to put the remote in the sun because they're trying to get it to change the, and so explaining to them how these, low load heating systems work, or an air to water radiant system, or whatever you might have. And so getting them to understand that the ventilation system is usually separate from their heating system, and how these two systems work and what they need to be looking for in their houses, and that it's perfectly fine to open the windows. Like, this isn't one of those things where you're like a lab rat where you have to keep the windows closed and you can only do, like, it's okay to open the windows. Here are the conditions you want to look for if you're trying to do nighttime cooling, or if the humidity is really high, or you're trying to prevent condensation. And don't open the windows in the basement, because that's actually the one place you don't want to do that, because you introduce too much moisture into a cool space. So anyway, we do a final with the homeowner so that they understand how all the systems work that they have, who to call if they have a problem, how often they need to change their filters or whatever they might have in it. And we go through all of that with them so that they know. And that they heard enough, right? Because they're on overload at this point. They've probably been building a house for 7 to 12 to 15 months. They're on overload, and that they know that you can call me in a month when you don't remember what I told you, and I'll come back and I'll explain. I love, on the very last house in the subdivision, the homeowner moved in December, and she sends me a text message, the lovely people, and she's like, "Oh my God, I'm breaking all of your rules. I need you to come over and tell me again how to do this." And I'm like, "I'm actually on site. I'll be over in 5. And I went over, and she's like, "I feel like I'm breaking all the rules." I'm like, "No, just ignore what this says. This is what you're supposed to do." Because they have taller ceilings, and the thermostat on the air source heat pump is on the top of the air source heat pump, which means if it's 9 feet in the air, it's going to read at a warmer temperature than what you would have at 5 feet off the ground, or 3 feet off the ground if you're sitting on the couch, which means you need to just ignore conventional wisdom, where on the thermostat it says 72 if you want to be comfortable at 3 feet off the ground. And so she was like, I turned it up really high and I thought I was breaking all the rules. I was like, "No, that's not how this works." So I find that that's really important. So I do 5 inspections as part of it. Just that's built into my contract from the very beginning. They pay it during the design fees before they have construction fatigue. It means I can just show up on the job site at those random intervals, even with contractors I've been working with for years and years. And then on other projects, we might have a couple of other things. We have a relationship set up where it's like an as needed basis. If you need me to come to the job site, especially for renovation projects, because something will change, something will go wrong. So you'll find something in the wall that you were not expecting. And it's better for them to call me and have me come to the site. And so you want them to kind of feel like it's as needed basis, a certain amount per hour if I need to come. But what I would really encourage you to do is, even if you're not getting paid to do construction administration, still go to your job site a couple of times, because it's really valuable to learn if the details that you drew were easy for your contractor to build, if they built it a different way that was better, so you can change your detail for the future, and so that you can just talk to the subcontractors and learn from their experience, right? Because the guy putting in plumbing every day knows more about plumbing than you do. So like, we know the basics, but you can go and you can find out like, oh, it was really hard for them to get this from here to there because we had this LVL. So next time we want to pay attention to that. We want to do coordination drawings. We want to make sure that it can get from point A to point B. And 99% of the time when you show up on the job site, if you're asking somebody about their profession, they're going to be happy to share with you. And now, if you show up on a job site and they're trying to get something done and they're already behind the wire, like, don't interrupt them. But it's a great way for you to get better and better at all of your details, because there's nothing worse than putting something on the plans that was then hard for them to execute, and you put it on the next project because you don't know. So I have a great relationship with a lot of my builders in the respect that I'm just going to show up on the job site and be like, how bad was that? Like, how bad was this tape install on these mid-mount European windows that you put in for the first time? What do you need to know? What do we need to do different? Who could I've gotten to help you with this? You know, how did this go up? What price things have gone up that we need to, you know, shift and do something different on the next project? So even if I'm not getting paid for construction administration, I still try to go to my job sites a couple of times just to learn and get better and learn how different people do things. So it's worth your time, even if you're not getting paid.
We have a question in the chat. Krista asks, thoughts on preparing user-friendly O&M for owner as part of CA services?
Yes. Do it. I actually have this thing where I think that we should create QR codes that are put in the mechanical room where somebody can just take a picture of the QR code and it automatically puts into their smartphone, because we all have smartphones now, what systems they have, how frequently they need to be doing things, and it'll just send them a reminder like quarterly, and it would pop up and it would be like, you know, vacuum your ERV filter, or replace your forced hot air filter, or, you know, call the air conditioning contractor to come and check the outdoor compressor so that there's not, you know, a mouse nest who thought like, this is a great warm place to live. And we haven't done a great job. Like, you buy a new car, you get all kinds of manuals that say when you're supposed to do all of these things or whatever. And so like, our houses haven't really followed along with that, but we should be doing that. And if you can offer it as a service, that's great. Some contractors do a hybrid. I think most homeowners are just kind of expecting a drawer full of like random refrigerator manuals, but it should be more than that. Things that are, you know, how frequently you might have to paint, or how frequently you have to change the filter in mechanical or ventilation, or, you know, if there's any other kind of different operations or maintenance things that are pretty standard. There's no such thing as no maintenance. Can't do it. That doesn't exist. And so as people kind of have a better understanding of like, you have to do some things with your house.
Do you find homeowners, you know, because the high performance homes, they do, you know, they have more systems to them, and, you know, and it's especially with like the air intake and things like that. Do you find that those types of homeowners are more inquisitive about kind of the operations of the house?
Not necessarily. You can have one of two things. You can have a passive house and an active occupant, or you can have a passive occupant and an active house, but your active house still has to have owner participation. So even though there are more systems in a high performance house, right? So you've got ventilation and heating, usually, they should operate a lot on their own. So they should actually have less participation from your owners than a standard. You have a oil boiler, you are supposed to have that cleaned every year. And I say supposed to because people don't do that, and you don't have a ventilation system and your ventilation is coming from the attic, and wonder why people are sick in your house. But like, if you've ever been in your attic with all of its, lovely, disgusting, dirty things, well, that's where the air comes from, if it's not coming from a ventilation source. And so what they're doing might be cleaning more frequently because they have to dust her, right? So it's just a trade-off. But if you want somebody who is a more active occupant, they can have a more passive house, right? So they can have less systems. But the hard part about that is then if you change occupants, the next occupant isn't necessarily going to have the same level. And that's what happened, I think, with a lot of the 70s, like super passive houses, is they required people to manage them. Open the windows, close the windows, manage the moisture, manage, the sunlight, close the blinds, all of that stuff. And so we're seeing like the second and third generations of those now, where, you go in, first of all, the double envelope houses were a fire hazard. So, I mean, that's just scary. But like they had these, solariums, and people are like, oh, we just use it as this place to hang out. And I'm like, it's got to be so hot in there. And so now they're trying to maintain how hot it is because it was meant to do something else. And so the more passive your house is, the more you have to have a user manual for the next person to know how to do stuff with
Run the house.
We're trying to make them less confusing, but there's still a lot of things that people don't understand. People are putting heat pumps in houses all across the board. Well, in general, it's a lot harder to heat an old house with heat pump heads. And so then sometimes they get a bad rap and, oh, it didn't stay warm in here. Well, of course it didn't stay warm in here. Your blower door is 8.5 and it leaks like a sieve, and it's warm in this room, but it's not warm in any of the other rooms. Versus in a high performance house, everything stays the same temperature. You need a little bit of heat to bring everything kind of back up. So there is still some education, but hopefully it's getting a little simpler.
Yeah.
So.
Other questions? I have plenty of questions, but I want to give everyone else a chance. Well, while people are thinking, I'll ask another question. On this topic of old homes, something that comes up a lot, is how to make old homes more sustainable. Like I've had clients, they have a very old house that was not built well, and they're like, yeah, we'd like to do a renovation and make it into a passive house. And I'm like, I was like, you want to take the whole thing apart?
That is hard. So
yes.
There's renovations, there's deep energy retrofits, and then it's just too complicated, build something new.
Right.
And I think it depends on really what camp you're in, because we're really moving towards our carbon emissions from day one, right? So we care right now about the next 10 years. How much carbon are we putting into a structure the day that we build it or the day that we renovate it? And so with these existing homes, if you have to take so much of it apart and you have to put so much of it in the dumpster, and you have to use spray foam to make the operational energy work, you're actually creating a bigger problem than the long-term efficiency of it, because for the next 10 years, you've used up a big chunk of carbon. So it depends on carbon emissions. It depends on what your client really cares about, because the best case scenario might be not to improve the efficiency as much as you thought you wanted to, and add another solar panel or two to your roof, or community solar if you can't put solar on your roof, because environmentally that might be a better solution. If you're in a position where you have this old house and it leaks like a sieve, and you need to do things for durability reasons so it lives for another 500 years, 100 years, we'll say 100 years, right? that you're controlling moisture management and you're controlling things like that, then those are good. Those are things that you absolutely want to do. And if you can control the air and the moisture, you can be a lot more comfortable in your house, even if you only have 2x4 walls and you put cellulose in them and it got better, but it didn't get like passive house better.
Right.
And that's the point where a certification program sometimes makes it challenging for you to do the right thing because you have to meet certain metrics. But the right thing might not be to put, 14 inches of rigid insulation under the slab with diminishing returns. Like the right thing might be to do, 2021 code level building and have 5 extra solar panels that, pay off in 12 years, or that their carbon deficiency is like a year or 2 or whatever it is to offset manufacturing of the actual panel. So the answer is it depends, and it's complicated when you're talking about renovation, because until you're in that physical structure, you're not sure where's the best place for them to spend their dollars? What's the most important thing for them to be doing? What do you have the ability to do? And the hard part about renovations is you don't want to create a Frankenhouse that somebody has to undo in the future, right? Like you're limited by what you have.
Right.
And sometimes that means you should take it down because the limitations are just too far, or that you should work with it, do some incremental improvements, and just say, okay, this was as good as we could get with this. So yeah,
That's a good way of
how is that
thinking
for a
about it.
non-answer?
Well, yeah, that's sort of the question, because there is there's no pat answer to that.
There's
point.
not.
It's a good way
Renovation
of thinking
is
about
so
it.
much harder. I mean, yes, when we're talking about carbon, we often say starting with something that's existing is really great. But then it depends on how far you want to take that existing thing. And if you're taking an existing thing, you're keeping a couple of studs and you're basically building something new around it. What have you really done?
Accomplished. Right.
So
in the chat, Krista asks about the lighting consulting. If you have resources, training, education that you found helpful.
So there are 2 BS and Beer show sessions that we did. So if you go on YouTube, you look up BS and Beer, there is the fundamentals of lighting, and there's another one with David, I'm going to say David Wilson, and that might not be his last name, who came on and did a lot of great kind of introductory, exploratory, multi-level lighting type stuff, where to get it. I don't know if he does any more training. We had him write a little section in the book, but we kind of want him to do a pretty good lighting book, like just write a whole book on it.
That would be awesome too.
That would be perfect. I did lighting consulting through a lighting design showroom who both sold fixtures and could offset the cost of lighting consultants by selling fixtures. I think that's how a lot of people did it. So if you're just really looking to learn more about lighting and what's out there and what's available, you can go to some of those places to see if they have any lighting designers on staff. There are actual courses, usually through the interior design world, on, like you can get a certification in lighting design. So there are continuing education, but I would definitely look up David, because he's really great at what I would say is better than the 4 cans and a fan, which is kind of the alternative to one center light. So, which is also not good. That doesn't do a lot for, emotional connection to rooms, because you've got a strobe in the ceiling with 4 cans that maybe are lighting the surface or maybe they're not. And so there are a lot of different ways. So I would start with the 2 BS and Beer show things on lighting, because they were both excellent. And he really, the very first one on the fundamentals describes his concept of layer cake lighting, which is like different lightings and the, kind of the arc of the day and where lighting is and how bright it is during different, and there are light fixtures that like warm up slowly in the morning. So you can have one that comes on that kind of mimics the sunrise in your space, that kind of stuff. So there's just some cool technology, but lighting technology also changes faster than pretty much anything else in the industry. So learning about it now might mean you have to learn about it again next year. It's just, you can kind of understand the fundamentals, but then what's available to make those fundamentals work is, is different. But I hope that
Awesome.
helps for starting out. And, I say BS and beer because it's free. Like, you just go on YouTube and watch the show, see if anything strikes your fancy, and then, go farther down the rabbit hole of that.
I was wondering too, if you could talk a little bit about nesting ground. My apologies for totally missing the name during the intro. And how that collaborative is formed. And
yeah, so Nesting Ground is the collaborative that worked together on the 5 Flat Solar subdivision. It's a landscape architect, myself, and the builder. It's what we pulled together to kind of do this project. Too often people think that the landscape architect just builds pretty plantings like this and does hardscaping, but she is so much more than that. We involved her from the very beginning of our project to do good water management, which is a thing that I don't know if this is across the board in architecture, but like, we don't just do the structures, we have a real impact on the actual physical land, and telling the contractor what they can do sort of on some of that land. So they have, if you're in the city, it's a little bit different because they don't have any lay down space. So clearly it is possible to build with 0 lay down space. But if you've got, land around it, they want 20 feet around it, and then they compact the soil by, driving bigger equipment, and then they've got water runoff problems in the future or whatever. So the landscape architect is trained to do a lot with water management and soil management. So actually, where this subdivision is, we have clay soil, which is very poorly drained. So she had to learn what would grow in it, which was fun and interesting. But we also worked with like where the water would go and what it would do. And she would, stake out areas like don't drive here, and like don't lay anything down within 30 feet of this tree, right? Because what you haven't thought about is that root structure is way longer than what you can actually see. Like, it's at least to the size of the canopy. So if you have a really big tree and the canopy overhangs, 30 feet, the root structure is also that wide. And so the partnership kind of came together where we said, we don't do projects without the landscape architect. We have an architect who is the designer, and we have this contractor. She's the one who builds it. And that it's kind of this weird intermingling of the landscape architect really needs to be involved with the architect when you first start design, but the builder also kind of needs to be involved in that part in the beginning, because she's the one that's buying stuff that said, this is what we've done, this is what we have. And so it's actually a very cool collaborative process where we've almost created this little design build world where the projects that we do together, you just get all 3 of us, and that's just part of this collaborative. So
cool.
Yeah, it is cool. And it's great. And it's like the ideal world of working in residential architecture, is that you have an awesome team put together beforehand. And like, she will say, like, okay, maybe everybody doesn't have $100,000 landscape budget on day one, right? But we want to try to minimize the things you have to undo. So like, don't plant grass. So loam and seed is like the most common thing on a residential thing. On a residential project. That's what the contractor is going to give you afterwards. They're going to final grade loam and seed, but it is nearly impossible to get rid of grass once you have it. So if you want to plant flower beds and stuff, don't loam and seed. Like, maybe what you do is you have wood chips around, somewhere. Or she actually didn't build the back terrace the first year that we built it. And when we did excavation, she just put the fill that would go under her back terrace in, because we were already on the site, and you wouldn't have to drive around the yard that she has a dog. So she has a small section of yard. You wouldn't have to drive around this yard she was trying to get to grow in to put the terrace in. And so it was just a different fill that we put in. So for the first year or two, she had kind of like a weird gravelly area in the back that, I mean, she put a patio table out there, and was it the beautiful terrace that she has now? No, but it kept her from having to have a heavy truck, bring that in, dig up anything that she had before. And so those planning things so that she didn't have to undo it was really important. I mean, she could have not done anything for 5 years and it would have been perfectly fine. So,
Right.
like planning ahead for that stuff and not having to undo something else is money well saved, even if you have to chip away at your landscape, a little bit every year. So.
Anyone else? I'll keep going.
She has more questions.
I have to jump off, but I just thought I'd say thanks. I turned my camera on just because that's what I do when we move to conversation time. But thanks, Emily. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, of course. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thanks for joining us, Josh. And for turning on your camera. I always appreciate that.
I know it's like, I mean, I understand the distraction of the faces and, especially so Emily, I run a small firm that's a design and consulting practice, but we do accessible design. So
that's great.
So when you were talking about like having a very niche residential practice, ours is also very niche. But yeah, I mean, when you're working, for example, when you're working with ASL translators, it's really helpful to have everybody else's camera off, right? They requested, because then it's much easier to see who's actually
to figure out who's talking. Yeah,
exactly. But then I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it's more conducive to conversation when the cameras are on.
Yeah.
So.
And more power to you with the accessible design. That's also, I mean, it's a very specific niche, but so critically important for things that you do. And, another topic that I like to hit on is just tell people you don't do other things. Tell people this is what you do. And then people who are looking for that will find you. So that's actually one of the questions that I get. Like, how do you get into sustainable design? It's like, you just say this is what we do and we don't do other things.
Right.
And it's equally important what you say no to.
But then
that was a hard lesson learned.
Sorry, this is on because I'm on like day 9 of my post-COVID isolations. This is from my family, but I'm curious, like, do you, I know we say that also, but then I take projects that are just kind of quote unquote general residential design because the GC that I work with really needs someone to, he has a client who needs an architect and, that kind of thing. Does that end up happening, or have you gotten to the point you've just said, no, if you don't want what I do, I'm not doing it?
It depends. We try to build what we do into our practice anyway, just because it's our base level of standard, right? Like, right. I'm just not going to give you something that's less than what we think that you ought to be doing, and right. And I mean, there are many ways to structure that and, take it all the way to passive house level, but like minimum standards, we sort of have a minimum standard across the board here with what we do. But like you said, and I said in the beginning, relationship building is so critically important. So if I have one of those contractors who I work with a lot, who's like, hey, I need something on this. We do bend our rules a little bit for some of that. Yeah. As long as you remember that if you don't say no to all of those projects, then you don't always have time for the ones that do come along. And so you either work more hours, which we all are trying for this whole work-life balance thing, which doesn't exist in architecture. Good luck. I haven't found it yet. Or that because you didn't say no to that, you may be too busy to take on something kind of in the future. And so yeah, I mean, I can't say that we didn't. And when I started out in 2009, I needed to build a portfolio and I needed to do stuff. And I would say that anybody who's new or trying to reinvent themselves, 30 by 40 design workshop is a great YouTube channel where Eric talks a lot about setting up his practice, what he wish he would have done, like we've all been there, like wish we would have done whatever in the beginning and like how they've done that. setting up passive income streams or things like that. And so I try to say no. And now that I have a project manager who consults with me more often and another architect who does a lot of consulting with me, I try to run it by the two of them as well to keep me honest. I actually make my project manager take all of the inquiries that come in so that she can eliminate people beforehand. Because if you do residential design, you get emotionally involved with people sometimes before you find out whether or not they can physically do their project. So I try to narrow that down because I want to help everybody, but I can't help everybody. And I do have to remind myself that cutting my fees is me funding somebody else's project. And so when you start thinking about it in that respect, you realize that you can't fund other people's projects. If you're cutting your fees and they can't afford to do that, then maybe they can't afford to do their project. And it often leads down to like problems down the whole road. And I'd also say once a year or once every couple of years, take a look at all the projects you did. Look at the projects you enjoyed the most. Look at the projects that made you the least amount of money, and stop doing some of the things that aren't good for your business, which is a hard thing to do. But yeah, just like you said, if I have somebody who I have a professional relationship with ask me to do something, I tell everybody I don't do commercial work. I have one person. If he calls me and asks me to do a commercial project, I'll do it for him, but that's it.
Yep.
So like occasionally you have a couple of things or a couple of places that you bend your rules, but the less you bend your rules, the more likely that at the end of the day, your ladder is leaning up against the right building instead of something else. And if you say yes to everything, then there's never enough time to do anything you actually want. And
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
it's hard enough to be in this industry. We should at least either make money or enjoy what we do.
Yeah.
Or both.
Yeah.
If you
Ideally
ideal
both.
world.
And what you said also resonated with me where, if we're doing something which is, designed for a specific disability, then, there are very clear decisions to be made. But, we do, like you said, we do lots of things as just a matter of course in our design. And so, this couple might not realize that they're getting aging in place. They think they're just getting a residential renovation, but that's just how we do it.
You've just built it into it. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So yeah. All right. I'm sorry, I really do have to run, but
No, that's okay.
but thanks. It's
Nice
nice
to meet
chatting
you.
with you. Take care, everyone. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Christina and Kristen, for putting this together.
Thanks for joining us. Any other questions? Well, I would like to say thank you so much, Emily. We really appreciate your candor, and so interesting to hear about all the different work you're doing. It's really fantastic. So
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been
It's fun.
a lovely conversation.
Yeah. And if people didn't want to speak up on the Zoom call, but want to reach out to me afterwards, feel free to send me an email or connect with me afterwards. I always try to share if I have the ability to do so. I don't always have time, but I try to share as much as I can because that's how we all get better. And there's plenty of work for all of us to do. So there's certainly no reason to be looking at this as like, oh, you're my competition and I can't do that. Like, man, I got plenty of things to do. I don't need more things. So.
I was just going to say, I'm Kyle. I got caught in traffic on the way back from a site visit, so I got here late. But you may have mentioned it in the intro, but there's a great Entree Architect interview with Emily that we should all listen to too.
Oh, great. No, we didn't mention that. Good to know. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, Emily, for
Thank you,
all
Emily.
your insights. It's really fantastic. We very much
Yeah.
appreciate it.
It was great. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Take care, everyone. Do we hit stop recording? Are you doing it?
Sure. Stop recording.